Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Team Tuesday this week with Lawrence Bonnema. Hi Lawrence, welcome back.
Hi Vasco, happy to be here again.
Absolutely. So Lawrence, on Tuesdays we talk about teams, but first, what was the book that potentially most influenced you in your career as a Scrum Master, and why?
That's got to be Extreme Programming Explained by Kent Beck. It was the first book on Agile that I read. I'd been reading the news groups up until then, where, these Usenet groups where today you probably don't go to.
Today we go to Facebook, right?
Exactly. But way back when, in 2000 and something, people actually used the news groups for, news. And there was news on the programming front where Ron Jeffries and Kent Beck and Jeff Sutherland, Ken Schwaber, and all those people, they were coming together in news groups talking about a little thing called extreme programming. And then at some point, a guy named Kent wrote a book about it called Extreme Programming Explained. And that really opened my eyes. I was a programmer at the time. I loved the craft. I was forever looking at how to make that better. And now I'd found it. There was a better way. That book really opened my eyes. And from then on, I was a fan of extreme programming. Sadly, though, I was a solo fan of extreme programming. So I couldn't pair with anyone because nobody else wanted to do it. But all the other practices, I tried to max out as much as I could.
Yeah, pairing. I mean, people listening to us in the future might find it quaint and kitsch that people refuse to pair. But if we go back in history, we find some heated flame wars about pairing being a good or a bad thing or whatever.
Oh yes, yeah. When I became a manager, I was still a fan of extreme programming. So I did the management thing, right? I pushed my thing onto others, which, as it turns out, is a very stupid idea. But anyway, one of my architects, he was totally against this, and not just a little bit. He was actively engaged in those kinds of flame wars, and that was an epic fight.
Yeah,
because I knew I was right, and he knew he was right, so we were just going head to head like almost every day. It was wonderful. But kind of distracting also.
Definitely distracting. Of course, XP, which kind of emerged over the years, I want to say from the small talk community. I'm not so sure, but I think that's kind of the origin.
Yeah, that's where it came from.
Using a language that was in itself quite revolutionary at the time. And of course, that transformed the way people looked at it. It had facilities that we didn't have in other languages. So people who were programming in C and maybe later in C++ looked at the small talk people as like weird people.
And arguably they were, right? The hippies of the programming languages. So the let's do everything together. Let's do everything object oriented. A lot of stuff that we now find normal was considered really far out there and weird in the year 2000.
But for me, I don't know what you think, Lawrence, but for me, the key contribution of XP is right there in the name, which is that it is both extreme, so turning it all the way up to 11, as they usually say, and it was about programming, because very often we forget, especially in the Agile community, we forget that software development is about programming. It is expressed in programming, and everything else is there to support that activity. The management is there to support the activity. The design practices are there to support that activity. The research we do into technology is there to support that activity. The collaboration is there to support that activity. But everything gets expressed through programming, and very often I see our fellow colleagues talking about Agile and about the software business as if it was only about how you facilitate meetings, how you make prioritization calls and all of that. And we forget that we are working in an environment that if it were not for programming, it would not exist.
Yes. And it's actually one of the things I always work with my clients or with anybody I coach to really make them understand that something like Scrum or any other Agile framework that tends to focus on how to facilitate stuff, even though Scrum is pretty open about it being mostly for programmers and also applicable outside. But still, a lot of people indeed seem to have lost that notion that to really make this shine, the framework itself usually isn't enough. You need also the engineering practices to make it really work in any given endeavor. And for programming, arguably, that is extreme programming, at least in my book. There are other ways to do it, but I found that extreme programming is like an ideal set of engineering practices to use when you're doing Scrum. So I always combine them. And when you're doing Scrum outside of IT and outside of programming, in HR, for example, I use the ideas from Fabiola Eiholzer there. But for marketing, I tend to use Ryan Levesque's Ask method. And those are, in my mind, the engineering practices of that field of play. And in software development, arguably one of the most influential ones there was extreme programming, and in my book still is. But well, I'm a little bit old there, so.
We kind of date ourselves, that's for sure. All right, Lawrence, now we turn our attention into teams and how sometimes they become their own reason for self-destruction. So tell us a story about a team. Tell us a little bit about the context, but then walk us through the steps that it took to develop this pattern, or anti-pattern rather, and behavior that led to problems in the team.
Yeah, I was Scrum Master of a team working diligently to deliver to the highest possible quality standards. We had as our motto, quality without compromise, and we were really proud of it. And one of the things that the team did was they had solid, really good discussions around how they were going to solve a problem. But like anything, you can overdo it. And what they ended up doing, and I had a hard time pointing out that potentially could be not good, they ended up discussing it some more, disagreeing, discussing, and it became the never-ending developer meeting, so to speak. And they were convinced that all that time was worthwhile. I had an extremely hard time convincing them that maybe it was time to also write some code, or that the combination of the two could be really beneficial. I hadn't heard of mob programming by that time. If I had, I would have certainly suggested it to them, because that was exactly the thing that was missing. And they were talking and they were having good discussions, right? So they were meaningful. So they actually did have a point in wanting to discuss that. But because they weren't also doing the work at the same time, they were essentially having one big long meeting without any actual progress. And that became a little bit of a thing. It was extremely hard for me to step in, because I was learning to be a really good Scrum Master, and I'd been told, well, you let it to the team, right? So the team decides how to do their work. And they essentially told me, yeah, this is how we decide how to do it. So you need to trust us. So they were also playing me a little there, and I was being played, to be honest, because I felt something was wrong there. And they probably also knew this too, but still, and I'm not talking about a little bit, like they had week-long discussions.
Wow. So going back to that moment, you're sitting there, you're listening to the conversations, and from your technical background, you're perhaps even acknowledging that these are important questions to raise and important conversations to have.
Yeah.
But as a Scrum Master, you have this nagging feeling that, the team isn't asking for feedback, isn't showing anything to stakeholders. This is all paper. This is not real code. If the compiler isn't running, or the interpreter for these days, if the interpreter isn't running, value isn't being delivered. Like, what do you wish you would have done differently at that time?
Well, what I wish I would have done differently is get an even more senior developer in earlier. I had a wonderful team of very, very good programmers. So I wasn't really thinking that was what was missing. But when one stepped in, we just got a more experienced developer on board who wasn't afraid to speak his mind. First thing that he did was make an end to those meetings by exactly telling them like it was. And because he was a fellow programmer, I was at that time outside of the team somewhat, right? So I wasn't actually doing the work, and they were therefore not really taking me seriously when I suggested it may be time to write some code. But when that guy came in and explained to them, dudes, this is not how this is going to work. let's go write some code and then discuss it, and then write some more and discuss it, and write some more and discuss it. That's obviously going to be better. That immediately clicked, and I'd been telling them exactly the same. So then I saw the value of actually doing the work, because that really convinces programmers of that what you're saying might be true. So with regard to what I would do differently now is I would find either someone on the team who was of that opinion and then stoke that fire a little bit as a Scrum Master. Like, wouldn't it be a great idea if you just spoke up so that everybody knew of this opinion? Because I think it's really valuable and actually what the team needs right now. Or just to get somebody in who, through the mind of the team, is like a rock star coder, and then have them work with the team to figure out where this is going wrong, because they must have felt that that was off. If I've been a programmer, and I know that if I was in week-long discussions, that I know that I was hiding from something or from some realization, and that if only somebody stepped in and helped me out there, that would have helped. And for me at that point in time, the lesson I needed to learn is I didn't need to do everything myself. I wasn't the fixer. I just needed to make sure that things got fixed. And so I should have asked for help, essentially, in getting the team to see that this was probably not the best use of their time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. Find somebody else with that experience that can raise the voice and I don't mean like loudly, but just talk and speak to the team about a different perspective, a different way to look at the same goal that they had, right? Because the goal was clear. They wanted to deliver something of high quality, but the way to get there was actually on their way. They weren't progressing. They weren't delivering anything. And that's perhaps for me the key lesson here is that we need to, as Scrum Masters, we need to always bring back to the center of the conversation that progress is only measured in running tested software. Progress is not measured in understanding, in agreement, in documentation, in reports, in any of that. It's only measured in running tested software. And perhaps it is not a very popular opinion, and perhaps we need, as you said, to get somebody else to express their opinion, like a trusted, more senior developer. But we need to be firmly in that position as Scrum Masters that progress is only measured by looking at running tested software.
Yes, indeed, definitely.
Thank you for that story, Lawrence.
Thank you, Vasco.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.